morning or good afternoon, whenever you'll be watching this presentation of slides. There is the title, as you can see, Postwar Airmail Cachets. Now, there's not necessarily applied within British Borneo or East Malaysia, but they were actually often applied to airmail covers that originated from there. So there's the contents, which I'm sure you can read and hopefully understand. So we will continue on to the first actual slide, which is by air throughout. Cachet there put on to this rather nice cover, which is a fairly early airmail. It's believed that this was being carried by RAF flying boat from Labuan to Singapore, and it started calling Kuching in early 1947. So this was the airmail rate at the time, so quite high. But in fact, it's going to be flown, not only was it going to be flown presumably via London, across the Atlantic, and then within the USA, hence the fairly high franking required. Now, it has been suggested that this might be a cachet put on by the company that is actually sending it. There was no company name on the back of this, on the flap of this cover. So for now, I'm going to assume it's a post office cachet. And now we've got a by air throughout. Now, in this particular case, there's a capital Y after the capital B, and this is coming from, right, censored, now I'm going to read this because I've forgotten what I've actually written down here. Scarce Labuan cachet, flight to boat to London across the Atlantic. So this is another air throughout in this particular case. And it's going from Kuching to New York, but it's believed by Proud at least that these were actually applied in Labuan when they presumably were doing the sorting of the mail. And there's air to London only. This is coming from Jesselton, the stamps from the back. And this is going to the Bahamas, despite it being actually having Canada. Oh, I see actually, when I look at this closely, that Canada has been sort of somewhat maybe crossed out. So Bahamas is certainly in the West Indies, not in the Bahamas, not in Canada. But it's got this air to London once again, and this is the only cover that's recorded by Proud. And this is another by air to London only, not recorded by Proud, probably applied in Kuching, or possibly applied in Singapore. Now, you would have thought that maybe the mail was being sorted in Singapore and they would actually apply this cachet there. Don't know, and I don't suppose right, now I understand now what I'm actually saying. It's got two by air to Londons only. You see one at the top there, which is in the same ink as the Sariki postmark. So presumably, well, might have been applied there, might have been applied in Kuching, don't know. And then we've got this rather faint in mauve near the bottom of the cover, which is air to London only. That might well have been applied in Singapore. Once again, this by air to London only, the one at the top is there, has not been previously recorded. So these are scarce items. And I would certainly like to see any other examples of these cachets. You can see here the airmail etiquette here, which has been put on by manuscript, has been crossed out. And these are the Juska marks, which were being applied in London when it got there, and then going to go by surface mail. You see these marks in pre-war airmails going via London. By air to Hong Kong only, I think this is once again and the only example recorded by Proud, going from North Borneo to Macau via Hong Kong. This is not my cover. I seem to remember it was for sale something like £350. And I thought at the time I couldn't afford that. Maybe I didn't know at that time it was the only recorded cover. But even so, there we are. It's a nice photocopy of it. The dealer very kindly let me take a photocopy of it when it saw it on sale at Stampex a few years ago. Right, now we come on to AV2s. Now, as I understand it, let's see if I can get this right. AV2s were applied to every registered cover to actually note that they were being recorded on the AV2 form, which recorded those packets of mail, of which there was too few in number, going to the destination from North Borneo, for instance, to actually make up a mail bag. So these were presumably tied up together, a piece of string, and then an AV2 form wrapped around them. But so each, as I understand now, I didn't know this before, each registered cover would actually have an AV2 applied to it. In the case of non-registered covers, as I understand it, and happy to be corrected, would only be the top cover of the pile that would actually have the AV2 applied to it. There is a military equivalent, an AV7, which would be accompanying military mail sent through a forces post office. Must be going there now, a registered cover. Presumably not just airmail, presumably going by surface as well. Right, next cover. I thought, I assumed that the AV2 was probably applied in Singapore, where the mail, which normally at this stage would be going by ship to Singapore from Borneo, North Borneo, Sarawak, would actually arrive and then be sorted to go on to the appropriate airmail flight from Singapore. I'm assuming that this AV2 as well. Now, I haven't got the book, which no doubt tells you all about where these AV2s were actually applied. But at the moment, I'm assuming this is in Singapore. Once again, if anybody would like to correct me, I'll be very, very pleased to receive their information. Double rate registered letter to Mrs. Hansford, and obviously her husband is one of the pioneer Sarawak philatelists and one of the founder members of the Sarawak Specialist Society. Might go back to that if I can. Oh, okay, yes. Okay, now it's another nice franking because this is got a 1946 commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the founding of Sarawak by James Brooke, and also is that period where Sarawak had actually reverted to I'm trying to remember what the right words are. The Brookes were actually, Viner Brookes once again heading up the administration. But of course, this didn't last for very long, and Sarawak, like North Borneo, soon became crown colonies.
I think you're in the wrong year, John.
Am I?
This is 47.
Yes, 46 was 46 the
yes.
anniversary stamp.
Yes.
Yes, we should have been, of course, came out in
1941. In April 47, the Royal Cipher issue appeared.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, well, that's interesting. These were still being reused. They're still being used.
Oh, yes. Yes, the BMA issue had been invalidated.
Yes.
But those continued for a little while.
That's rather interesting as well. So thank you for that. Yes. Good, good, good. Right, what have we got now? Oh, we've got an AV, it's another AV2, but this from North Borneo, and this one, again, I'm assuming is applied in Singapore. So nothing much more to be said from that, except it's got a rather quite nice franking. Why they're using a block of 4 50 cents, I don't know. it would have been nice if I'd actually put on a couple of $2, which are actually quite scarce, used on cover. What are we looking at? Oh, flown by RAF, New York, probably via London. Oh, okay. If it's going via London, it's rather surprising because it's actually addressed to San Francisco, California. So it seems rather striking. There we are. Right, now this AV2 I do not recognise. Now this is going to a distinctly unusual destination, Saudi Arabia. Unusual from North Borneo anyway. Where might it have been applied? Now, rather assuming this cover would have gone via India and then to the Middle East. It only took 5 days to get there, so that's a pretty good going from North Borneo. At this time, I think there was a fairly regular flights were going from North Borneo, sort of via Luna, I imagine, to Singapore. And then it caught a flight which got it to India and then eventually to Saudi Arabia. But as you can see, this has been applied to a non-registered envelope, so it is distinctly unusual. Right, we've got a first flight cover here, which is the interesting bit about this is it's actually using a cachet which we first see used in 1930 from the RAF survey flights, which went into Sarawak, starting at Kuching, then through North Borneo, then eventually into Brunei and back again. And while they were flying between various towns within North Borneo, these, of course, they were float planes from Singapore. Apparently they carried this wooden shop with them, and this was applied to the mail which was being carried. Well, this is in the 1930s. Now, this somehow had survived, presumably in the back of a drawer somewhere, in the Jesselton post office, which I think was one of the few post offices who actually survived the bombing by the Allies of North Borneo prior to its liberation from the Japanese. It's believed this was found by Newton Wade, who was looking after postal matters for the BMA in North Borneo and Sarawak, well, certainly North Borneo. He had been pre-war North Borneo Postmaster General, or certainly acting Postmaster General at Jesselton. So he wasn't a military man as such, but he was brought in by the BMA because he knew about postal matters in Borneo. So no doubt it was his good idea to actually apply these chops to this first flight mail. And this is the only time I've seen this used post-war, and the only time I've seen it used between those RAF survey flights and this use here. And now we've got a somewhat philatelic cover, but this is addressed to Major F.E. Wood, or Dr. Wood, who was the pioneer philatelist of Malay philately. And he published this seminal work, Straight Settlements Postage Stamps, in 1948. And Lieutenant Colonel Newton Wade was his nephew. So this is really rather nice, but very philatelic. Great fun. And I seem to remember, I mean, at that time, there were no such things as A3. You couldn't put your covers onto an A3. There's only allowed the A4s. And this wouldn't fit onto any sort of anything that could be displayed. So I got it at a surprisingly cheap price because it couldn't be displayed, but it can be displayed now. Right, where have we got now? Oh, this might or might not be a post office cachet, this Airmail one here. Once again, it's the first flight cover, but this seems to be unique. The actual commercial flight starts from Cebu to Singapore started a week later than this. And so this might have come from some proving flight, which a philatelist in Cebu had found out about and prepared this cover. I say it might be a post office cachet because of the very bright purple of this Airmail cachet, and it's the same, or very much the same in my eyes anyway, as this registered cachet here. So I think it might be, but there's an awful lot of Airmail cachets you'll find applied to covers, and I'm quite certain that most of those will be from companies or from individuals. This is something different. This sent to Kuching. So I'm trying to remember. Oh yes, this has been recorded by Proud, but he recorded it very much earlier. Later. Yes, only one date of usage in 1957, and this is from 1953. So it's obviously a fairly scarce item. And you don't see an enormous amount of mail coming into the territories at this period, or really at any period. Right, we have quite a number now of the insufficiently prepaid cachets, and here's one that has been recorded by Proud from Kuching, presumably applied in Kuching, and this was deficient by 44 cents. So somebody was a bit optimistic here, and obviously it would have gone by surface mail. And you can see the Airmail etiquette has been crossed out. Oops. Right, and this is a narrow setting, so exactly the same, and presumably the same type, but it's just being reset. So the overall length is 44 millimeters rather than 48 millimeters, and it's not being listed by Proud. This once again was seriously deficient to go by Airmail, and so once again would have been sent by Seamail. Now, where are we now? Oh, yes. Well, this is the interesting thing about this is this subject to first class rate. This was actually franked by the, it was correctly franked for second class Airmail, but second class Airmail mustn't be sealed. And as you can see from the on the right hand side of this cover, it obviously has been sealed. And so therefore it was subject to first class rate. And subject to first class rate, it was insufficiently prepaid. And so therefore, presumably, it went by Seamail. A very, actually, a very nice combination of post office cachets. It's actually been marked up at 10 grams, which is the correct, which is the correct weight for the first weight step for second class Airmail. We've got one here from North Borneo, a very different shop, as you can see here. It's in capitals and it's been and it's boxed. The problem with this one was it had been put into the civilian mail. Somebody popped it into a post box, and of course it should have gone to actually to be sent at this forces rate. It should have been sent via the Forces Post Office at that time out in North Borneo. So this was, oh no, I've got this wrong. Sorry, start again. The Forces, the 20-cent Forces concessionary rate was only to Commonwealth countries, not to, as you see here, Switzerland. So what I'm getting from this actually is that it could be sent by the civilian mail, not by FPO. Interesting. You live and learn if you start looking at what you've actually got. Right. insufficiently prepaid again, but this is after independence. There's no other postal markings on this item at all, front or back. The ITU stamps were, as you can see, were issued in 1965, so I have to assume it's there or thereabouts. At this time, the colonial design Sarawak Queen Elizabeth stamps were still being used in Sarawak, and which is, I suppose, quite interesting in itself. Second class airmail, internal airmail rate was 15 cents. So in fact, it's actually franked, I suppose, at the surface rate. So and that's presumably what it went by. It doesn't seem to have been sealed, so presumably that wasn't the problem with it, unlike the previous cover we'd seen. Another one, later one. This one was sent going to Finland, and obviously rather optimistic that putting a 15-cent stamp on to send this by airmail to Finland. So once again, etiquette has been crossed out, and presumably went at the went by surface. This one is a bit of an oddity. There were troops in Sarawak, as I understand it, at this time. I'm saying at this time, but once again, this is one of these items which hasn't got any sort of other postal marking or dated marking. So the British fourpenny stamp was issued in 1969. The guy who's actually writing to his dad is saying, having a great time, got a dark tan. So maybe he didn't have maybe he was with the forces and didn't have much to do, rather than a bit of Western recreation. But it hasn't got any sort of forces marking at all. I suppose it must have got to the UK one way or the other. A nice card, actually. This is one of these sort of smaller cards. I think it's a particularly nice colour, these sort of 1960s, 50s, 60s cards. It's quite a nice example, I think. So we'd have to go by forces mail, would have to have some sort of confirmation from an officer that in fact he was in the forces. It would have to be signed as such. There's nothing like that, so presumably it went by surface mail, but I'm not quite sure it can go by airmail anyway. This is insufficiently prepared for transmission by airmail. To have gone by airmail, the cover would have to be so endorsed. So that was what was thought. There was some discussion about this. In fact, if you want to send it by airmail, you actually have to put that onto your cover that it's going to be sent by airmail. You can't just assume that the post office will work that out from the stamps you put on. But according to Lawrence Tan, when I actually sort of displayed this before to our friends over in Kuching, the airmail rate to Australia was 55 cents. So it's not it's wrong in several ways. Prepared, was that a misprint for prepaid? Don't know. We've got a few comet crashes. Now this is, I was once said before, I said these might not have been applied in Sarawak or North Borneo or Naburn, etc., but was applied to mail coming from there, and this is one of them. This is one of the first comet crash, as you can see there, near Calcutta. Now that crashed in a violent storm, so at that time there was no suspicion there was actually anything wrong with the fuselage of the comets. So they continued flying. There's two types of this one, of this salvage mail. Presumably was applied in India. This one, I think, although unfortunately rather faint, just at this place here, this actually says near Calcutta. Now, the one I'm going to show next actually says near Calcutta. Now this was very nicely singed, so this is so this certainly has. Oh, I'm sure they both come from the Airmail, but I say this is certainly bears the its damage. Quite obviously from a large envelope, so it's 11 times the, so it's 5.5 ounces, and very nicely franked with a 2 franc, 5 franc and 50 cents. So although it's been cut down, it's really quite a nice item, I still think. And then we've got from the second crash, this crashed into the Sea off Elba. A few mailbags were picked up by fishing boat and they sort of surfaced a few days later, by which time they had got well and truly soaked. So presumably it dried off and then sent to London and resealed, as you can see here with a UK sealing strip here, and this damaged by seawater comet mail applied to it. Now, it was not possible to actually retrieve the crashed plane. And so they still continued flying, but there was another crash sometime later, and that was in more ways than one, the death knell of the Comet 1. Very unfortunate, you probably know the story. They put in square portholes and the flexing as the pressures varied as it was flying into low pressure atmosphere, and the flexing actually caused metal fatigue. It just started at the corner of the square portholes, and the plane basically exploded, and all killed. And so I say that was the death knell of the Comet 1. It's often not the best idea to be the first out of to be the originator of a brand new concept. There is actually, I'll come out of that. There is, you can see Borneo there, and this is like the North Borneo cachet at the time, but there is a very faint, well-washed Jesselton North Borneo postmark on the back. So that's the end of my display. So thank you very much for watching. If you've got any comments, I'd be only too pleased to hear from you. And that's my email address, or you can contact me via our website, the Sarawak Specialist Society. And if you're at all interested in any of the stamps or postal history or revenue items of these territories, and of course East Malaysia, you might like to have a look at the website of the Sarawak Specialist Society and